Fox News host Tucker Carlson is facing backlash for how he used previously unseen video of the January 6th assault on the Capitol.
Yeah, Carlson aired the clips on his show last night, but critics accuse him of cherry-picking footage given to him by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to push a false narrative.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Hi there, Nikole. So what kind of picture did Carlson paint about the attack on the Capitol?
Well, he basically accused the House Select Committee investigating the attack on the Capitol January 6th as a lie. And he also suggested that the media was lying about what happened as well, although we know that the narrative he painted was not necessarily truthful either, in the sense that he tried to portray a January 6th as a peaceful day, describing these protesters as meek, showing scenes from some of the footage that he was able to obtain of them shuffling through the Capitol, suggesting that they weren't trying to do any harm. He also talked about, for instance, Officer Brian Sicknick, who died in the days after January 6th, and suggested that that was not because of the mob. And he showed video of an officer that appeared to be Brian Sicknick walking around in the hallways. He also talked about Jacob Chansley, the QAnon shaman, and showed him being flanked by a Capitol Hill police officer, suggesting that he was not leading this mob. But all that to say that this has really created a lot of controversy and blowback, particularly on Capitol Hill, as well as from members from the Sicknick family who say that they are outraged by what Tucker Carlson broadcast last night.
What are some of the lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, saying about Carlson's accusations?
Well, first, I do want to start with the Sicknick family, just because, that was such a big part of the broadcast last night. And the family did put out a statement again saying that they were outraged. I talked to the partner of Brian Sicknick, who I interviewed in the months after his death, who said this is really just causing agony, and not just for her, but for all of the families who were impacted by January 6th. In terms of lawmakers, what I would say is that, we are seeing bipartisan blowback here. You have Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who was on the floor today, who really criticized the release of this footage, to even some Republicans Republican senators like John Thune, who is the GOP whip, one of the top Republicans in the Senate, below Mitch McConnell, who basically said that, this was an attack on the Capitol. Another Republican lawmaker telling one of our producers that this is BS. So, there is some concern on the part of Republicans as well that what was broadcast last night didn't necessarily reflect the true facts of what happened.
Yeah, I think when you look back at that day, I got so many calls, so many people just looking at those initial images without even knowing the details of how things were orchestrated, and still go, wow.
Right. So compelling. Yeah.
Nikole Killion, thank you.
And joining us to talk more about the media's impact in this is Robert Thompson. He's the director of Syracuse University's Bleier Center for Television and Popular Culture. He's also a trustee professor of television, radio, and film at Syracuse. Professor, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So we know, of course, the January 6th hearings were televised. Now we have Tucker Carlson airing his essentially rebuttal on his show. Are Americans getting a clear picture of what took place on January 6th?
Well, I think we've gotten a clear picture for many, many months now. I mean, we went through all of those hearings. We saw an awful lot of footage. We certainly haven't had a lack of inside, outside, above, below views of this. What was interesting about this is that it took all of this footage and it edited it as though it were telling a different story. I mean, I guess the equivalent might be, let's say you've got footage covering a tornado, and the stuff you air is the tornado hitting the place, and then you show all the buildings that have fallen down and the grief and the weeping and all of that. I suppose there's also footage you could go back and show the houses that were still standing and people standing around laughing and having coffee and that kind of thing. It's not like that didn't happen, but that's not what the story was. We've seen up until now the violent acts and all the rest of it because that's what the story was told. This was a violent day. It's almost as though this has been, re-edited to show not that stuff, but that doesn't mean that didn't happen. If you show houses still standing, that doesn't mean the neighborhood hasn't been knocked down by a tornado. So it was, using some of the same stuff we've seen, but de-emphasizing the violence. I will say this, there was a lot of the violent clips that we had seen before on Tucker Carlson, even though it was narrated, someone opened the door and the rest just came in. As he was saying someone opened the door, they showed someone kicking in the doors. It was a really odd broadcast.
Carlson claimed that the media and lawmakers lied about January 6th, calling the day mostly peaceful. Is Carlson just adding fuel to the misinformation epidemic in this country, or do you think his questions about January 6th are legitimate, just presented sort of contentiously, given the tone of his show? And also, I know there's a lot of questions here. Do you think people are just tired of hearing about it? Because a lot of people saw what they saw. And for those who wanted to cover it,
about a lot of things.
Yeah, they've covered it very closely and watched it closely.
Yeah. We're tired about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be covered. As for the misinformation, I think the conclusions that were drawn on Tucker Carlson, at Tucker Carlson's show, were often conclusions that the data did not cover. The idea that there were places that violence wasn't happening during the January 6th events, were supposed to lead us to conclude that therefore violence wasn't happening. At one point, he came out and said this was neither insurrection, nor was it deadly. So the footage was the footage, but the conclusion that was drawn was also a big section about how they still very much assume that federal agents were there to incite violence. Nothing of the footage shown last night, and I doubt any of the footage that is shown again tonight, in any way indicates that claim is true. So the footage is what was in the cameras. The interpretations, I think, went all over the place.
All right, Professor Robert Thompson. Professor, thanks very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.